My daughter-in-law threw my grandson's beloved teddy bear in the trash. I rescued it, thinking he'd want it back. At home, I noticed something hard inside. Curious, I cut it open, and what I found made my blood run cold. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me back up and tell you how I got to this moment. Sitting in my kitchen at 11 at night, staring at a tiny camera that had been hidden inside little Tommy's stuffed bear for God knows how long. It started 3 days ago when I went to pick up Tommy from Sarah's house. Sarah is my son Michael's wife. And while I've tried to maintain a good relationship with her over the years, she's always made it clear that my presence is more tolerated than welcomed. She's one of those women who smiles with her mouth, but never with her eyes, if you know what I mean. I knocked on the front door and waited. Through the window, I could see Tommy in the living room, clutching his worn brown teddy bear that he'd had since he was 2. Mr. Buttons, he called it. That bear went everywhere with Tommy, a constant companion that had seen him through nightmares, doctor visits, and every sleepover at Grandma's house. Sarah opened the door looking frazzled, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing yoga pants that had clearly seen better days. "Oh, Diana, right? You're here for Tommy. As we discussed yesterday," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "The zoo trip, remember? Right, yes." She glanced back into the house nervously. "Actually, there's been a change of plans. Michael thinks Tommy's getting too old for these outings. He needs to focus more on his studies." I raised an eyebrow. Tommy was 8 years old and it was Saturday. His studies. "You know how competitive things are these days," Sarah said, blocking the doorway with her body. "Children need to stay focused if they want to succeed." Behind her, I could hear Tommy's voice. "Grandma Diana, are we still going to see the elephants?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "Thomas, come here, please." Tommy appeared beside her, still holding Mr. Buttons. His face lit up when he saw me, and my heart did that little flip it always did when I saw my grandson. He had Michael's eyes but my late husband's stubborn chin, and when he smiled the whole world seemed brighter. "Sorry, buddy," Sarah said, putting her hand on Tommy's shoulder in a way that looked more controlling than comforting. "Grandma Diana can't take you today. Maybe another time." "But you promised," Tommy said, his voice small and confused. I knelt down to his level. "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll go another day." I reached out to give him a hug, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Tommy flinched when I moved toward him. A slight but unmistakable pulling back that spoke of someone who'd learned to be careful around adults. "Sarah," I said, standing up slowly. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," she said quickly. "Tommy's just tired. It's been a long week." But as I looked at my grandson, I noticed other things. A small bruise on his forearm. The way he held himself slightly hunched as if protecting his ribs. The careful way he moved like someone who'd learned not to make sudden gestures. "Well," I said, forcing brightness into my voice, "maybe Tommy could at least show me his room." I brought him a new book. "Actually, we're about to head out," Sarah said. "Rans to run. You understand?" That's when I heard it. Michael's voice from inside the house, loud and angry. "Where the hell did I put those papers, Sarah? I told you not to touch my desk." Tommy's grip on Mr. Buttons tightened, and he took a small step backward. "On second thought," Sarah said, her voice strained, "why don't you take Tommy for a few hours? We'll pick him up around dinner time." The sudden change made my suspicious mind go into overdrive, but I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. "Of course, Tommy, grab your jacket. Can Mr. Buttons come, too?" Tommy asked, looking between Sarah and me. Sarah's expression darkened. "Tommy, you're getting too old for that ratty old thing. It's time to grow up." "Actually," she continued, her voice taking on that false sweetness I'd learned to recognize as danger, "why don't we just throw it away? It's getting dirty and falling apart." Tommy's eyes went wide with panic. "No, please, Mom. He's not dirty. I'll take better care of him. Promise." "The bear stays here," Sarah said firmly. "Diana, he'll be fine without it." As we walked to my car, I could hear Tommy sniffling quietly. I glanced back and saw Sarah tossing Mr. Buttons into the large garbage bin by their garage. The sight of that beloved toy disappearing into the trash made something inside me snap. Tommy loved that bear more than anything in the world, and Sarah had just thrown it away like it was nothing. "Tommy," I said softly. How about we stop for ice cream on the way to my house? We spent the afternoon at the park, and slowly Tommy began to relax. We fed ducks at the pond, played on the swings, and talked about everything and nothing. But I noticed he kept touching his ribs when he thought I wasn't looking. And once, when a father at the playground raised his voice at another child, Tommy instinctively moved closer to me. When I dropped him off that evening, I made a decision that would change everything. I waited until all the lights were off in the house. Then I crept back to their garbage bin. Digging through coffee grounds and food scraps, I found Mr. Buttons near the bottom, dirty but intact. Sorry, old friend, I whispered to the stuffed bear. Tommy's going to be so happy to have you back. But as I held the bear up to the streetlight to check for damage, I felt something that didn't belong. Something hard and rectangular inside the bear's chest. Definitely not stuffing. Back at my house, I set Mr. Buttons on my kitchen table and stared at him. In 30 years of being a grandmother, I'd seen a lot of toys come and go, but I'd never felt anything like this inside a stuffed animal. I found my sewing scissors, and with the kind of careful precision I'd learned from 40 years of mending clothes and fixing toys, I made a small incision along the bear's back seam. Inside, wrapped in plastic and duct tape, was a small digital camera. My hand started shaking as I pulled it out. Why would someone hide a camera inside a child's toy? And more importantly, who had put it there? The camera was still warm. That's when I realized Tommy hadn't just been carrying around his beloved teddy bear. He'd been carrying around evidence. The camera was password protected, but I've spent enough years helping Tommy with his electronic toys to know that most people use predictable passwords. I tried his birthday, then Michael's, then Sarah's. Nothing. I sat at my kitchen table until 2 in the morning, turning that tiny device over in my hands. The implications were staggering. Someone had been recording my grandson, possibly for months, and they'd hidden the evidence in the one place no one would think to look. Inside his most treasured possession. Sunday morning came too soon. My phone rang at 7:30, jolting me from the restless sleep I'd finally managed to catch on my living room couch. Diana, it's Sarah. We need to talk. Her voice was different, tighter, more controlled than usual. Good morning to you too, I said, switching the phone to speaker while I started making coffee. What can I do for you? Tommy says you promised to bring Mr. Buttons back. I paused with the coffee filter halfway to the machine. Did he now? Yes. And I told you yesterday that we're getting rid of that toy. He needs to learn to let go of childish things. Sarah, that bear means the world to him. What's the harm in letting him keep it? The harm, she said, her voice rising slightly, is that you're undermining my parenting decisions. Michael and I have agreed that Tommy needs to mature, and that includes giving up baby toys. I looked across my kitchen at Mr. Buttons, sitting on the counter with his small incision barely visible. Since when is an 8-year-old considered too old for a stuffed animal? Since his behavior has become problematic, Tommy's been having nightmares, wetting the bed, acting out at school. His therapist says he's too attached to comfort objects. Therapist? This was the first I'd heard about Tommy seeing a therapist. What kind of problems at school? I asked carefully. Aggressive behavior. Fighting with other children. Refusing to follow directions. Sarah's voice took on that practiced tone parents use when they're repeating someone else's diagnosis. Dr. Martinez says it's common in children who don't have proper boundaries at home. And Dr. Martinez thinks the solution is taking away his security blanket. Dr. Martinez thinks Tommy needs to learn coping mechanisms that don't involve clinging to objects. I set down my coffee mug harder than necessary. Sarah, Tommy has never shown aggressive behavior when he's with me. Are you sure there isn't something else going on? Silence, then more quietly. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm asking directly. Is Tommy safe at home? How dare you? Her voice went ice cold. How dare you even suggest that we would hurt our own child? I didn't say you would hurt him. I asked if he was safe. Same thing. And the answer is that this conversation is over. Do not bring that bear back, Diana. Do not encourage Tommy's unhealthy attachments. And do not question our parenting again. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. In all my years of dealing with Sarah's controlling behavior, she'd never been quite this defensive. And the way she'd immediately jumped to the conclusion that I was accusing them of hurting Tommy suggested that the thought wasn't foreign to her. I picked up the camera again and tried a few more password combinations. Tommy's middle name, the street they lived on. Michael's birthday backwards. Still nothing. Then I remembered something. Tommy had mentioned his favorite number once when we were playing a counting game. 17. He'd said it was special because it was the day he got Mr. Buttons. I typed 1717. The camera unlocked. The first video file was dated 3 months ago. Tommy's bedroom shot from the angle of someone sitting on his bed. The quality was surprisingly good, clear enough to see details I wished I couldn't see. Michael's voice off camera. If you tell anyone about this, Tommy, no one will believe you. And if they do believe you, you'll never see Grandma Diana again. Do you understand? Tommy's small voice. Yes, sir. Good boy. Now put Mr. Buttons back on the shelf and come here. I stopped the video, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the camera. There were 47 more files. I called my neighbor Betty, a retired nurse who'd become like a sister to me over the years. Betty, I need you to come over right now and bring your laptop. Diana, it's 8 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. What's wrong? I can't explain over the phone. Just please come over. And Betty, we might need to call the police. She arrived 20 minutes later, still in her bathrobe, but carrying her laptop bag. What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, I said, leading her to the kitchen. I've seen proof. I explained about finding the camera, about Tommy's behavior, about Sarah's defensive reaction to my questions. Betty listened with the expression of someone who'd seen too much in her 30 years working pediatric emergency rooms. Diana, she said carefully, you need to be very sure about what you're suggesting before you make any accusations. I know. That's why I want you to watch these videos with me. I need someone else to confirm what I'm seeing. We spent the next 2 hours going through the files systematically. Betty took notes on her laptop, documenting dates, times, and what we observed. By the time we finished, we both had tears streaming down our faces. That poor baby, Betty whispered. How long has this been going on based on these dates? At least 3 months, maybe longer. We have to call Child Protective Services immediately. I nodded, but something was nagging at me. Betty, why would they be recording this? Why would someone document their own crimes? She looked up from her laptop. What do you mean? I mean, if you were hurting a child, would you create video evidence of it? Would you keep that evidence where it could be discovered? Maybe they're sick enough to get off on watching it later. Some people know. I interrupted. Look at the angles. Look at how the camera is positioned. These aren't recordings made by the perpetrator. They're recordings made by someone trying to document what's happening. Betty rewound one of the videos and studied the angle. You're right. The camera is positioned like someone was trying to capture evidence, not create a personal collection. Which means Tommy didn't just find this camera. Someone gave it to him. Someone who knew what was happening and wanted to help him prove it. But who? And why hide it in his teddy bear instead of going directly to the police? That's when I heard a car door slam outside. I looked out the window and saw Michael's pickup truck in my driveway. Betty, take the laptop and the camera upstairs. Now Diana, what? They can't know we've seen this. Not yet. Go. Michael knocked on my front door with the kind of aggressive politeness that barely contained violence. I opened it to find him standing on my porch with Tommy beside him. Hi, Mom. Michael said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tommy wanted to come apologize for being upset about his toy yesterday. I looked down at my grandson who was staring at his shoes. Hello, sweetheart. Go ahead, Tommy, Michael prompted, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder in a way that looked supportive but felt threatening. I'm sorry, Grandma Diana, Tommy said in a voice so small I could barely hear it. I know I'm too old for stuffed animals. That's all right, honey. You don't need to apologize for anything. Michael's grip on Tommy's shoulder tightened. Actually, he does. Tommy has something to ask you. Tommy looked up at me with eyes that held too much fear for an 8-year-old. Grandma Diana, do you still have Mr. Buttons? What makes you think I have him, sweetheart? Sarah saw you by the garbage cans last night, Michael said, his voice still carrying that fake pleasantness. Neighbors talk, small town and all. I felt a chill run down my spine. They'd been watching me. Tommy just wants to make sure his old toy gets thrown away properly, Michael continued. It's part of his therapy, facing difficult transitions. I see. And what happens if I don't have the bear? Michael's smile became more genuine, but not in a good way. Well, then I guess someone must have beaten you to it. But I'm sure you'll do the right thing, Mom. You always have. Tommy looked up at me one more time. And in that brief moment, I saw something that made my heart stop. He winked. It was quick, barely perceptible, but it was definitely a wink. My 8-year-old grandson had just sent me a signal, which meant he knew exactly what was in that camera, and he was trusting me to do something about it. Of course, I said smoothly, not missing a beat despite my racing heart. Let me go get it for you. I walked back toward my kitchen, my mind spinning. Tommy's wink changed everything. He wasn't just a victim. He was a co-conspirator. Someone had taught him to hide evidence, and he was smart enough to play along with his abuser's demands while secretly hoping I'd understand the real message. Actually, I called back toward the front door. I think I left it in my car. Let me just check. I grabbed my keys and walked out to my driveway, Michael and Tommy following close behind. I made a show of opening my trunk and digging around. I could have sworn I put it in here, I said, frowning. Maybe it fell out somewhere. Michael's pleasant expression was starting to crack. Mom, I really need you to find that bear. Why? I asked, straightening up to meet his eyes. It's just a toy, right? What does it matter where it ends up? It doesn't matter to me, he said carefully. But Tommy's therapist says it's important for him to be the one to throw it away. Closure, you know. I looked down at Tommy, who was doing an excellent job of looking disappointed while somehow managing to convey relief at the same time. This kid was either a natural actor or he'd had way too much practice hiding his real feelings. I tell you what, I said, why don't I keep looking, and if I find it, I'll bring it by later this week. Actually, Michael said, his voice losing all pretense of friendliness, I prefer if you found it right now. Michael, I said in my best mother voice, the one that had stopped him in his tracks when he was 12, I am not going to tear apart my house and car for a stuffed animal. If I find it, I'll let you know. For a moment, I saw the real Michael underneath the facade. The anger he was working so hard to control, the desperation that was driving this entire conversation. Fine, he said finally. But Mom, don't make us wait too long. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. They drove away, and I waited until their truck disappeared around the corner before I allowed myself to breathe normally again. Betty came downstairs as soon as I locked the front door. What just happened? Tommy winked at me. He knows about the camera and he wants me to keep it. A wink. Diana, are you sure? He's 8 years old. Betty, that child has been living with abuse for months. 8-year-olds learn to be survivors when they have to. Trust me, he winked. I pulled out my phone and called the non-emergency number for our local police department. I need to speak with someone about child abuse. Yes, I have evidence. Video evidence. The desk sergeant transferred me to Detective Lisa Morrison, who agreed to meet me at my house within the hour. Ma'am, if there's immediate danger to the child, we can send a patrol car right now. No immediate danger, I said, looking out the window to make sure Michael's truck wasn't coming back. But I think time is a factor here. Detective Morrison arrived 45 minutes later with a child advocacy specialist named Mrs. Chun. Both women listened without interruption as I explained the situation, showed them the camera, and played portions of the videos. Mrs. Walsh, Detective Morrison said when I finished, this is some of the clearest evidence of child abuse I've seen in 15 years on the force. The question is, how did Tommy get this camera? I've been thinking about that, I said. Someone who knew what was happening gave it to him. Someone who cared enough to help but couldn't directly intervene. Any ideas who I thought about Tommy's life, his school, his neighborhood, the people who had regular contact with him? What about his teacher or the school counselor? Mrs. Chun leaned forward. Actually, there's another possibility. Have you noticed any other adults in Tommy's life who seem particularly concerned about his welfare? Family, friends, neighbors, maybe a coach or tutor. Well, there's Dr. Martinez. Sarah mentioned that Tommy is seeing a therapist for behavioral problems. Dr. Martinez, Detective Morrison repeated, writing the name down. First name? Sarah didn't say, but she made it sound like the therapy was Michael and Sarah's idea. Not a school referral or court order. Interesting. In cases like this, sometimes therapists will try creative ways to help children document abuse, especially if the child is too scared to speak directly. That made sense. A therapist would have access to recording equipment, would know how to coach a child on hiding evidence, and would understand the legal requirements for proof. But there's something else, I said. I think Tommy got this camera from his school counselor, Mrs. Peterson. She's been asking him careful questions about home life, and Tommy told me she gave him a special project to work on, documenting his daily activities. That's much more plausible, Mrs. Chun said. School counselors are trained to recognize abuse signs and help children gather evidence safely. So what happens now? I asked. Now we move fast, Detective Morrison said. Based on what we've seen here, we have enough for a search warrant and immediate protective custody. But Mrs. Walsh, I need you to understand something. Once we start this process, there's no going back. Michael and Sarah will know the evidence came from you. I understand. They might retaliate, file complaints, spread rumors, try to turn other family members against you. People accused of child abuse often become very vindictive toward the person who reported them. I thought about Tommy's small face, the way he'd flinched from my touch, the fear in his eyes when Michael raised his voice. Detective Morrison, I've been a mother and grandmother for 40 years. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I've never regretted putting a child's safety first. Good. Mrs. Chun will coordinate with Child Protective Services. We'll need you to stay available for the next 24 hours in case we need additional information. After they left, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and tried to process what I'd set in motion. By tomorrow, Tommy would be in protective custody. Michael and Sarah would be under arrest. My family would be destroyed. But maybe, just maybe, Tommy would be safe. My phone rang at 9 that night. Unknown number. Hello, Mrs. Walsh, this is Dr. Elena Martinez, the therapist. My heart started racing. Dr. Martinez, hello. Sarah mentioned that you've been working with Tommy. Mrs. Walsh, I need to meet with you tonight. There are things about Tommy's situation that you need to know before the police get involved. The police are already involved. Silence. Then I was afraid of that. Mrs. Walsh, how much do you know about what's been happening to Tommy? I know enough. I found the camera. Another pause. So Tommy was able to get it to you. Thank God. Mrs. Walsh, I need you to understand something very important. What you think you know about this situation is only part of the story. What do you mean? I mean, there are other children involved. Tommy isn't the only victim, and Michael and Sarah aren't the only perpetrators. The room started spinning. Other children. Mrs. Walsh, can you meet me at Denny's on Route 9 in 30 minutes? We need to talk before you say anything else to the police. There are things on that camera that you probably haven't seen yet and decisions you need to make about how much of the truth you're ready for the world to know. I looked at the clock. It was almost 9:30 at night. Meeting a stranger at a restaurant this late felt risky, but Dr. Martinez was right about one thing. I had only watched about half of the video files on the camera. How do I know you're really Tommy's therapist? Because I'm the one who convinced Mrs. Peterson to give him the camera. And Mrs. Walsh, I'm also the one who taught him to wink. Denny's at 9:30 on a Sunday night was exactly as depressing as you'd expect. Fluorescent lights buzzed over empty booths and the smell of reheated coffee mixed with disinfectant. I spotted Dr. Martinez immediately, a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the kind of tired eyes that come from seeing too much human cruelty. She waved me over to a corner booth and already had a cup of coffee waiting for me. Mrs. Walsh, thank you for coming. I know this seems irregular. Irregular doesn't begin to cover it, I said, sliding into the booth across from her. You gave my grandson a camera to spy on his parents. I coordinated with Mrs. Peterson, his school counselor, to give Tommy a way to document what was happening to him. But Mrs. Walsh, what I need to tell you is going to be difficult to accept. Something in her tone made me pause. What are you talking about, Mrs. Walsh? I've been working with Tommy for 6 months. During that time, I've learned that the situation in his home is much more complex than it appears. Complex? How? Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Mrs. Walsh, what did you see when you watched those videos? Specifically, what did you see Michael doing to Tommy? I tried to remember the specific details. I heard him threatening Tommy. I saw Tommy looking terrified. But did you actually see Michael physically harming Tommy? I know, but the threat was clear. Mrs. Walsh, I need you to consider the possibility that what you interpreted as threats were actually something else entirely, such as Michael coaching Tommy on how to behave around the real abuser. I stared at her. What are you talking about, Mrs. Walsh? Tommy is being abused, but not by Michael and Sarah. They discovered what was happening and have been trying to protect him while gathering evidence against the actual perpetrator. That's impossible, is it? Think about the videos again. Think about the careful way they were positioned. The specific angles that captured conversations but not actions. I felt my certainty wavering. Who is the real abuser? Someone who has regular access to your house, Mrs. Walsh? Someone Tommy trusts? Someone who convinced him that if he ever told anyone what was happening, you would be hurt. My blood went cold. My house, Mrs. Walsh. The reason Tommy hid the camera in Mr. Button's wasn't just to document the abuse. It was to make sure you would find it because you're the only person the abuser hasn't figured out how to manipulate or threaten. Dr. Martinez, you're not making any sense. The person who's been hurting Tommy has been using your house for months. They have a key. They know your schedule. And they've been bringing Tommy there when you're not home. That's impossible. Only Michael and my neighbor Betty have keys to my house. Dr. Martinez's expression grew even more serious. Mrs. Walsh, when was the last time you had your locks changed? I thought back. 3 months ago. After that break-in scare in the neighborhood. And who recommended the locksmith? Betty. Betty recommended him. Mrs. Walsh. The locksmith was Betty's nephew. And Betty has been the one giving Tommy's abuser access to your house. The restaurant suddenly felt like it was spinning. Betty would never hurt Tommy. Betty isn't hurting Tommy directly. But she's been allowing someone else to use your house as a location where Tommy could be abused without Michael and Sarah's knowledge. But why would Betty? Because she's being blackmailed. Mrs. Walsh. Betty has been struggling financially since her cancer treatment. Someone offered to help with her medical bills in exchange for occasional access to your house. I thought about Betty's behavior lately. The way she'd been so quick to come over when I called. Her immediate willingness to help review the videos. Her knowledge about exactly where to position cameras for the best evidence. Dr. Martinez, if this is true, why didn't Michael and Sarah just tell me? Because they weren't sure if you were involved. The abuser convinced Tommy that you knew what was happening and approved of it. Tommy was terrified that if he told his parents the truth, you would confirm that you wanted him to be good for the special adult who visited your house. That's sick. It's also very effective manipulation. Mrs. Walsh, Tommy loves you more than anyone in the world. The threat that you might be disappointed in him, or might send him away was enough to keep him silent for months. But then why did he wink at me today? Because yesterday when he watched you rescue Mr. Buttons from the garbage, he realized that you were trying to protect him, not hurt him. He decided to trust you with the truth. I sat back in the booth trying to process everything Dr. Martinez had told me. If all this is true, then Michael and Sarah have been protecting Tommy this whole time. Exactly. And when you called the police today, you may have jeopardized months of careful investigation. Investigation? Mrs. Walsh, Michael and Sarah have been working with Child Protective Services and federal authorities to build a case against a network of people who have been systematically abusing children in this community. Federal authorities, the person who's been hurting Tommy isn't working alone. This is part of a larger operation. And Tommy isn't the only victim. How many other children? We think at least 6, possibly more. All children from stable families. All being abused by people they trust. All too scared to tell their parents because they've been convinced their families would blame them. Dr. Martinez pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph. Mrs. Walsh, do you recognize this man? The photo showed a man in his 40s wearing some kind of uniform. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. He's been coming to your house for months, Mrs. Walsh. Usually when you're at the grocery store on Thursday mornings, I don't know who that is. His name is Robert Henderson. He's Betty's son. Everything clicked into place. Betty's son. The one she rarely talked about. The one who worked in security and traveled a lot for his job. Mrs. Walsh, Robert Henderson has been using your house as a location to abuse Tommy and other children. Betty has been providing him with your schedule and your house key. And now that I've called the police, now Henderson knows the investigation is compromised. He'll disappear along with any evidence that could be used to save the other children. I pulled out my phone. I have to call Detective Morrison. I have to tell her. Mrs. Walsh, Detective Morrison can't be trusted. What? Detective Morrison is part of the network. When you called the police station today, You gave Henderson advance warning that Tommy had evidence. The walls of the restaurant felt like they were closing in. How do I know you're telling me the truth? Because Dr. Martinez said quietly, if I were part of it, you'd already be dead. Calling Detective Morrison at 10:30 at night to retract my statement was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Her disappointment was palpable through the phone. Mrs. Walsh, are you sure about this? Child abuse cases are difficult enough without false reports complicating the investigation. I'm sure I lied, hoping my voice sounded more confident than I felt. I was upset and confused. What I saw on the camera was just Tommy playing games, pretending to be in trouble. You know how imaginative children can be. Mrs. Walsh, with respect, I've seen those videos. That didn't look like pretend to me. Detective Morrison, I know my grandson. He's been going through a difficult time with his parents' divorce proceedings. Another lie, but it rolled off my tongue easier than I expected. Sometimes children act out their fears in their play. Divorce proceedings. Mrs. Walsh. Our preliminary background check showed that Michael and Sarah Walsh have been married for 9 years with no record of separation or divorce filings. My blood went cold. I meant they've been having marital problems. Nothing official. I see. Mrs. Walsh, I'm going to ask you directly. Has anyone pressured you to change your story? No one has pressured me, Detective. I just realized I overreacted. All right, but Mrs. Walsh, if you change your mind again, if you remember anything else, or if anyone contacts you about this case, please call me immediately. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the teddy bear-eyed Res1 and wondering if I just signed Tommy's death warrant. Dear. Martinez's story made sense in some ways, but there were holes in it that troubled me. I picked up the camera and scrolled through the remaining video files I hadn't watched. Most were similar to what I'd already seen. Tommy in his bedroom, voices off camera, conversations that sounded threatening, but could potentially be interpreted as coaching if you approach them with Dr. Martinez's explanation in mind. But the last video file was different. It was timestamped from 2 weeks ago, and it showed Tommy in what looked like a basement, not his house. I'd been to Michael and Sarah's house plenty of times, and they didn't have a finished basement. This was somewhere else entirely. In this video, Tommy wasn't alone. There were 2 other children, both younger than him, both clearly terrified. And the voice giving instructions wasn't Michael's. Now, children, I want you to remember what we practiced. If anyone asks you what happens during our special time together, what do you say? 3 small voices in unison. We don't remember. And if someone says they want to help you, we say we're fine. Good. And Tommy, if your grandmother or anyone else asks you about your special camera, I say it's just for playing games. The camera angle shifted and I caught a glimpse of the person speaking. It was a woman with gray hair and a familiar voice, Mrs. Henderson. But that wasn't what made my hands start shaking. What made my blood turn to ice was the recognition that I'd been in this basement before. It was my basement. The video had been recorded in my own house. I ran downstairs to my basement, my heart pounding. Everything looked normal at first glance, but when I examined the corner where the video had been shot, I found what I was looking for. Scuff marks on the floor where furniture had been moved. A faint discoloration on the wall where something had been mounted and then removed, and in the corner, a single small sock that didn't belong to anyone in my family. Mrs. Henderson had been using my house, but that was impossible. Mrs. Henderson didn't have a key to my house. She'd never even been inside my house unless someone had given her access. I thought about all the times over the past few months when I'd come home to find small things out of place. A book moved from where I'd left it. Coffee grounds spilled on the counter when I was sure I'd cleaned up. The thermostat set to a different temperature than I remembered. I'd attributed it all to my own aging memory, the small forgetfulnesses that come with being 64 years old. But what if it hadn't been forgetfulness at all? What if someone had been coming into my house regularly when I wasn't there? I went back upstairs and checked all my doors and windows. Everything was locked, but that didn't mean much if someone had a key, who had access to my house. Michael had a spare key for emergencies. My neighbor Betty had one for when I traveled. And my blood ran cold as I remembered. 3 months ago, I'd had my locks rekeyed after a break-in scare in the neighborhood. The locksmith had been recommended by Betty, who said she'd used him for her own house, and he was very reliable. I'd never questioned it. Why would I? Betty was a sweet woman who'd lived in the neighborhood for decades. If she recommended someone, they must be trustworthy. But what if Betty hadn't been trying to help me? What if she'd been ensuring that someone she trusted would have access to my house? I found the receipt from the locksmith and looked up the company online. Henderson Security Services, owned and operated by Robert Henderson, Mrs. Henderson's son. My phone rang, making me jump. Unknown number again. Hello, Mrs. Walsh. This is Agent Sarah Chun with the FBI. My knees went weak. Agent Chun. Mrs. Walsh, I understand you've been in contact with someone claiming to be Dr. Elena Martinez regarding your grandson's situation. Yes. She said she was working with federal authorities. Ma'am, Dr. Elena Martinez is not working with us. We've been trying to locate Dr. Martinez for 2 weeks. We believe she may have been kidnapped by the same people who have been threatening your grandson. The phone slipped from my hands and clattered to the floor. When I picked it up, Agent Chun was still talking. Mrs. Walsh, are you there? Mrs. Walsh, you're in immediate danger. We're sending units to your location right now. Do not open your door for anyone until we arrive. Do you understand? I understood, but it was too late. I could already hear footsteps on my porch. Yum. The footsteps weren't hurried or stealthy. They were measured, confident, the footsteps of someone who knew they had every right to be there, which somehow made them more terrifying than if someone had been trying to sneak up on me. I grabbed a kitchen knife with one hand and my phone with the other, backing toward my rear door while staying on the line with Agent Chun. They're here, I whispered into the phone. Mrs. Walsh, stay calm. Our units are 3 minutes out. Find somewhere to hide and stay on the line. The front doorbell rang. Once, twice. Then a familiar voice called out. Diana, it's Betty. I saw your lights on and wanted to check on you after everything that happened today. Betty, my neighbor, my friend, the woman who'd helped me review the videos and take notes about Tommy's abuse. The woman who'd been upstairs when Michael came to my house. The woman who had a spare key to my house. Diana, are you all right? Your car is in the driveway, but you're not answering. I heard the sound of a key in the lock. Mrs. Walsh. Agent Chin's voice was urgent through the phone. Is that someone you trust? I thought I did, I whispered, moving toward my back door. Diana. Betty's voice was closer now. She was inside my house. I'm coming in to check on you. I'm worried something's happened. I reached for the deadbolt on my back door and realized with growing horror that it was already unlocked. I always lock that door at night. Always. Mrs. Walsh, stay where you are. Agent Chun said. Do not try to leave the house. We're almost there, but it was too late for that advice too. The back door opened and Mrs. Henderson walked in like she owned the place. Hello, Diana, she said pleasantly. I think we need to have a conversation. Behind her were 2 men. I didn't recognize both wearing the kind of uniforms I'd seen in the shadows of Tommy's videos. I ran for the front of the house, still clutching my phone and the kitchen knife, but Betty was blocking my path. Oh, Diana, she said with genuine sadness in her voice. I wish you hadn't gotten involved in this. Betty, how could you? The words came out as a sob. Tommy is your neighbor. You've watched him grow up. Tommy is a business asset, Mrs. Henderson said, walking into my living room like she was entering her own home. A very valuable business asset who was becoming too much trouble. The FBI is on their way, I said, holding up my phone. Agent Chun, they're here. All of them. Mrs. Henderson smiled and nodded to one of the men who took out some kind of electronic device. The call went dead and my phone showed no signal. Signal jammer, she explained conversationally. Very useful for maintaining privacy during sensitive conversations. What do you want? We want the camera, Diana, and we want you to understand what happens to people who interfere with our operations. I already gave the camera to the police. No, you didn't. You called Detective Morrison and retracted your statement. Very wise, by the way. Detective Morrison isn't someone you want to trust with sensitive information. My mind reeled. Detective Morrison is working with you. Detective Morrison has been very helpful to our organization for several years now. She makes sure that certain reports get misfiled, certain investigations get delayed, certain children who run away never get found. Emma Rodriguez. Mrs. Henderson raised an eyebrow. Very good. Yes, Emma became problematic just like Tommy was becoming problematic. Children can be so unpredictable. Where is she? Emma is no longer a concern for anyone. The casual way she said it made me want to vomit. Now, Diana, here's what's going to happen. You're going to give us the camera and all copies of the videos you've made. Then you're going to write a letter explaining that you've decided to take an extended vacation. You'll leave town quietly, and if you're very good and never contact anyone about what you think you've seen, you'll be allowed to live out your remaining years in peace. And if I refuse, then you'll have a tragic accident and Tommy will disappear just like Emma did. I looked at Betty, the woman who'd been my friend for 15 years. How long have you been part of this? Since Robert died, she said quietly. You think a nurse's pension covers the cost of keeping a house in this neighborhood? You think Medicare pays for my cancer treatments? So, you sold children for medical bills? I facilitated business arrangements for adults who were willing to pay well for specialized services. The children were well cared for. Diana fed, clothed, given toys and attention. Most of them didn't even understand what was happening. Tommy understood. Tommy was always too smart for his own good. Mrs. Henderson agreed. That's why we had to get creative with his situation. The fake therapy, the fake FBI agent. Dr. Martinez really was Tommy's therapist. She was also becoming too curious about his home situation. We had to adjust her level of involvement in the case. You killed her. We solved a problem just like we're going to solve the problem you've created. One of the uniformed men stepped forward. Ma'am, we need to move this along. The neighbors might notice the activity. Mrs. Henderson nodded. Diana, the camera. Now, I looked around my living room at the photographs of my family, at the life I'd built over 40 years of marriage and motherhood. It's upstairs. I lied. In my bedroom. Robert, go with her. Mrs. Henderson instructed one of the men. Make sure she doesn't try anything creative. As we walked toward the stairs, I tried to think of any way to signal for help, any way to let the real FBI agents know what was happening. But Mrs. Henderson's signal jammer was blocking all communication. And for all I knew, the agent's agent Chun had promised weren't coming at all. Ma'am, hurry up, Robert said, prodding me forward with something that felt like a gun barrel against my back. In my bedroom, I went to my dresser and pretended to look through the drawers. I know I put it somewhere safe. Stop stalling, Robert said. Mrs. Henderson doesn't like to be kept waiting. That's when I heard it. The sound I'd been praying for. Sirens. Robert heard them too and immediately grabbed his radio. We've got company incoming. Multiple units. Mrs. Henderson's voice crackled through the radio. How long do we have? 2 minutes, maybe less. Execute the contingency plan, clean up and move out. I knew what clean up meant. I also knew I had about 30 seconds to live unless I did something. So I threw my jewelry box at Robert's face and ran from my bedroom window. The window that led to the roof over my back porch, the roof I'd climbed out onto dozens of times as a teenager, sneaking out of my parents' house. The roof that, 64 years old or not, was still my best chance of staying alive long enough for help to arrive. I heard gunshots behind me as I threw myself out the window, but I was already falling toward the darkness below. And all I could think about was Tommy, and whether anyone would ever be able to save him now. I landed hard on the Elia bushes beneath my bedroom window. Thorns tearing through my nightgown and scratching my arms and legs. Pain shot through my left ankle, but I could still move, which meant it wasn't broken. The gunshots had stopped, replaced by shouting voices and the sound of cars screeching away from my house. I crawled deeper into the bushes, trying to make myself invisible, while red and blue lights began strobing across my yard. FBI houses surrounded. I wanted to call out to let them know where I was, but I couldn't be sure Mrs. Henderson and her people were really gone. For all I knew, they were waiting in the shadows with orders to shoot anyone who tried to escape. Heavy footsteps pounded through my house. Clear. Clear. Kitchen. Clear. Basement. Clear. Then a different voice, one I recognized from the phone. Mrs. Walsh. Mrs. Walsh. If you can hear me, this is Agent Chun. You're safe now. We need you to respond if you're able. I crawled out from under the Elia bush, every muscle in my body protesting. Here, I called weakly. I'm here. 2 agents found me immediately, one shining a flashlight while the other knelt down to check for injuries. Mrs. Walsh, are you hurt? Do you need medical attention? My ankle, I said. And I think they killed Dr. Martinez. Ma'am, Dr. Martinez is alive. She's in federal protective custody. The woman you met tonight was not Dr. Martinez. Relief flooded through me so intensely I started crying. Tommy, where's Tommy? Is he safe? Ma'am, we need to get you medical attention first, and then we'll brief you on the situation. No, I said, grabbing the agent's arm. Tell me about Tommy right now. Agent Chun appeared beside us. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with short dark hair, and the kind of focused intensity that comes from years of dealing with the worst humanity has to offer. Mrs. Walsh, Tommy is safe. He's been in protective custody since yesterday afternoon. Yesterday? But Michael brought him to my house this morning. That wasn't Tommy. The world tilted sideways. What do you mean that wasn't Tommy? Mrs. Walsh. Tommy hasn't been living with Michael and Sarah for 3 weeks. The boy you saw today was another child, probably coached to impersonate your grandson for Mrs. Henderson's benefit. I stared at her. Where has Tommy been? In a safe house with Michael and Sarah. Mrs. Walsh, your son and daughter-in-law have been cooperating with our investigation for 6 months. They've been helping us map out the entire network. But the videos, I saw Tommy being threatened. You saw Tommy helping us gather evidence. Mrs. Walsh, your grandson volunteered to wear that camera. He insisted on staying in the house long enough to document what Mrs. Henderson and her associates were doing. An 8-year-old volunteered for undercover work. An 8-year-old was determined to make sure other children didn't go through what he'd experienced. Tommy is remarkably brave, Mrs. Walsh, and remarkably smart. The paramedics arrived and insisted on taking me to the hospital despite my protests. As they loaded me into the ambulance, Agent Chun promised to meet me there with a full briefing. Agent Chun, I called out as they were closing the ambulance doors. How many children were involved in this? Based on what we've discovered tonight, we believe Mrs. Henderson's network was responsible for the abuse and trafficking of 43 children over the past 5 years. 43. Mrs. Walsh, what you did tonight helped us rescue 11 children who were being held in locations throughout the state. Tommy's camera gave us the evidence we needed to get search warrants for properties we never would have found otherwise. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that my ankle was sprained, but not broken, and that the cuts from the Elia bushes were superficial. But the emotional damage was going to take much longer to heal. Agent Chun arrived with coffee and a thick folder of documents. Mrs. Walsh, I need to walk you through what actually happened over the past few months, because I suspect you're feeling responsible for things that were completely beyond your control. She was right. I was drowning in guilt about not seeing the signs sooner, about trusting Betty, about almost falling for the fake Dr. Martinez's story. Mrs. Walsh. 6 months ago, Tommy told his school counselor, Mrs. Peterson, that his babysitter was playing games that made him uncomfortable. Mrs. Peterson reported it to Child Protective Services, who contacted our office because of some connections between this case and other investigations we were conducting. What kind of connections? Mrs. Henderson wasn't just a babysitter who decided to abuse children. She was part of an organized network that specialized in recruiting children from stable middle-class families. Children whose disappearances would be noticed but who could be controlled through threats against their families. How does that work? They identify children who are isolated, kids with working parents, minimal extended family involvement, few close friends. Then they gradually gain access to the child through legitimate means: babysitting, tutoring, community activities. Mrs. Henderson had been Tommy's babysitter for 2 years. Exactly. And during that time, she slowly began introducing him to other adults in the network. Always under the guise of normal, innocent activities. A friend who wanted to meet the sweet boy she'd heard so much about. A photographer who was looking for models for family portraits. A doctor who was conducting a research study on child development. My stomach turned and Tommy just went along with it. Tommy was 8 years old when it started. He trusted Mrs. Henderson and she was very good at making everything seem normal and fun. By the time he realized something was wrong, Mrs. Henderson had convinced him that if he told anyone, his parents would be arrested and he'd never see them again. So, how did he finally tell someone? He didn't tell anyone directly. He started acting out at school, fighting, refusing to do his work, having what his teacher described as explosive emotional episodes. Mrs. Peterson recognized the signs of trauma and started asking careful questions. Agent Chen opened her folder and showed me a drawing. This is a picture Tommy drew during one of his counseling sessions. He said it was his secret friends playing secret games. The drawing showed several adult figures surrounding a small child, even rendered in crayon. The menace in the image was unmistakable. Mrs. Peterson shared the drawing with Child Protective Services, who called us immediately. Mrs. Walsh, cases like this are incredibly difficult to prosecute because the children are too traumatized to testify, and the abusers are usually very good at destroying evidence. So, you asked an 8-year-old to collect evidence for you. We asked Tommy if he wanted to help make sure other children didn't get hurt the way he'd been hurt. We explained that it would be dangerous, that he'd have to continue spending time with people who had hurt him, and that he'd have to keep the secret from everyone except his parents. And he said yes. He said yes immediately. Mrs. Walsh, I've been working these cases for 8 years, and I've never met a child as determined to seek justice as your grandson. I thought about Tommy's wink, about the courage it must have taken for him to signal me while standing next to the man he thought was threatening him. Agent Chan, who was the boy I saw today, the one pretending to be Tommy? His name is Marcus. He's 10 years old and he's been in foster care for 3 years. He volunteered to help with the operation after we rescued him from another part of Mrs. Henderson's network last month. Another child who wanted to help catch the bad guys. Children who've been victimized often want to take action to prevent other children from experiencing the same trauma. It gives them a sense of agency in situations where they previously felt powerless. Agent Chan closed the folder and looked at me directly. Mrs. Walsh, I need you to understand something very important. You didn't fail, Tommy. You didn't miss obvious signs or ignore clear warnings. Mrs. Henderson and her network were professionals who had spent years perfecting their methods of manipulation and control. But Betty, I should have known about Betty. Betty Kowalski was recruited into the network 18 months ago, when she was facing bankruptcy due to medical bills from her cancer treatment. Mrs. Henderson approached her with what seemed like a legitimate business opportunity, providing child care services for wealthy families who needed discretion. Discretion. Families involved in high-profile divorces, celebrity families, politicians. Betty thought she was providing babysitting services for children whose parents needed to keep their activities private for legal or professional reasons. She didn't know what was really happening. By the time Betty realized the true nature of what she was involved in, Mrs. Henderson had enough evidence of her participation to ensure her cooperation through blackmail. I thought about Betty's face when she'd blocked my path to the front door. The sadness in her voice when she'd said she wished I hadn't gotten involved. Agent Chan, will I be able to see Tommy soon? Tomorrow. Michael and Sarah are bringing him to the safe house where we'll conduct your reunion. Mrs. Walsh, you should know that Tommy has been asking about you constantly. One of his biggest concerns throughout this entire operation was that you might think he'd stopped loving you. Why would he think that? Because he's 8 years old and he's been carrying the weight of protecting everyone he loves while pretending to be someone he's not. Children that age often worry that their deception, even when it's for good reasons, might change how the people they love feel about them. I wiped my eyes with the scratchy hospital tissues. When this is all over, when the trials are finished and everyone's been arrested, what happens to Tommy? Tommy goes back to being a normal 8-year-old boy. He continues therapy to help him process his experiences. But Mrs. Walsh, children are remarkably resilient. With proper support and a lot of love, most of them recover completely from experiences like this. And the other children, the 11 children we rescued tonight, are all receiving medical care and trauma counseling. Most will be reunited with their families within the next few days. Some will need foster care while we locate relatives or ensure their home environments are safe. Agent Chun stood up to leave. Mrs. Walsh, get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a very emotional day, but it's also going to be the beginning of putting your family back together. After she left, I lay in the hospital bed thinking about Tommy, about his courage and his clever plan to get evidence to me through his beloved teddy bear. I thought about how many people had been involved in keeping him safe and how close we'd all come to losing him. But mostly I thought about how proud I was to be his grandmother. The safe house was a nondescript 2-story colonial in a suburban neighborhood about an hour from my town. As Agent Chan drove me there the next morning, she briefed me on what to expect. Mrs. Walsh, Tommy has been through extensive debriefing over the past 24 hours. He's processed most of what happened, but he's still dealing with some conflicted emotions about the deception he had to maintain. What kind of conflicted emotions? Guilt about lying to you, fear that you might be angry with him, anxiety about whether the other children are really safe. She pulled into the driveway of a house that could have belonged to any middle-class family in America. Mrs. Walsh, I want you to remember that despite everything Tommy has been through, he's still an 8-year-old boy. He's going to need time to adjust to not having to hide secrets anymore. Michael opened the front door before we reached it. My son looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 6 months. Gray streaks in his hair that hadn't been there before. Deep lines around his eyes. The weight loss that comes from chronic stress. Mom, he said, and his voice broke on the word. I hugged him tighter than I had since he was Tommy's age. I'm so sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry I didn't understand what was happening. Mom, you couldn't have known. We couldn't risk telling you because Mrs. Henderson was monitoring everything. Your phone calls, your visits, even your grocery shopping patterns. She was watching me shop for groceries. She was watching everything. Mom, Betty was reporting on your daily activities, your emotional state, your relationships with neighbors. If you had seemed to know more than you should have, or if you'd started asking the wrong questions, they would have moved Tommy immediately. Sarah appeared in the hallway behind Michael, and I could see she'd been crying. Diana, I'm so sorry. I know how awful we must have seemed to you. You were protecting Tommy. You were being the parents he needed you to be. But the cost, Sarah said, making you think we were hurting him, watching you try to save him from us when we were trying to save him from them. Agent Chan cleared her throat gently. Mrs. Walsh, Tommy is upstairs. He's been waiting for you all morning. I climbed the stairs on shaking legs, my sprained ankle protesting with each step. At the top of the landing, Agent Chum pointed to a closed door. He's in there. Take as much time as you need. I knocked softly. Tommy, it's Grandma Diana. Come in, came a small voice. Tommy was sitting on a twin bed, wearing jeans and a Superman t-shirt, looking exactly like the normal 8-year-old boy he'd always been underneath all the horror. Mr. Buttons was in his arms, carefully res-one and clean. When he saw me, his face crumpled and he started crying. I crossed the room in 3 steps and gathered him into my arms, teddy bear and all. We held each other and cried for everything we'd been through, everything we'd almost lost and everything we'd found again. Grandma Diana, Tommy said when he could finally speak. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth. Oh, sweetheart, you have nothing to apologize for. You were so brave. You saved yourself and you saved other children too. But I had to lie to you. I had to let you think Daddy was being mean to me. Tommy, you did exactly what you needed to do to stay safe. That's not lying. That's surviving. Agent Chan says Mrs. Henderson can't hurt anyone anymore. That's right. She's in jail and she's going to stay there for a very long time. Tommy pulled back to look at me. Grandma Diana, did you really climb out your bedroom window? I laughed. The first genuine laugh I'd had in days. I did. And I'm too old for that kind of nonsense, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. Agent Chun says you're a hero. Agent Chun says you're a hero too. And she's right. Tommy snuggled closer to me. Grandma Diana, can I ask you something? Anything. Sweetheart, when everything goes back to normal, when I don't have to see doctors and agents and answer questions anymore, can we go to the zoo? For real? This time. We can go to every zoo in the state if you want to. Just one zoo is fine, but I want to see the elephants. Then we'll see the elephants. We spent the next hour talking about ordinary things, school, friends, his favorite movies, plans for his upcoming 9th birthday. It was the most normal conversation I'd had in a week, and it was exactly what both of us needed. Michael and Sarah joined us for lunch, and for the first time I could see the family they really were when they weren't pretending to be people they weren't. Sarah was gentle and funny with Tommy, making jokes about the FBI agent's cooking skills and letting him win at card games. Michael was relaxed, patient, more like the son I remembered from before. The weight of protecting his child had changed him. Mom, Michael said as we were finishing lunch, there's something else we need to talk about. My heart sank. What now? Nothing bad, he said quickly. It's about Mrs. Henderson's house. What about it? The FBI found some things there that belong to you. Jewelry, photo albums, some documents. They think Betty must have taken them when she had access to your house. Things I didn't even know were missing. Apparently, Mrs. Henderson kept trophies from all the families her network affected as a way of maintaining psychological control over the people she was manipulating. Will I get them back? Eventually. Right now they're evidence, but Agent Chun says they'll be returned to you once the trials are over. Sarah leaned forward. Diana, there's something else. The FBI says you can't go back to your house right away. Mrs. Henderson had it under surveillance for months, and they need to make sure all her associates have been identified and arrested. Where am I supposed to live? With us, Tommy said immediately. You can stay in my room and I'll sleep on the couch. Actually, Michael said, we were thinking more long-term than that. Mom, Sarah and I have been talking, and we want you to consider moving closer to us. Closer? How? There's a house for sale 3 streets over from ours. 2 bedrooms, small yard. Close enough that Tommy could walk to your house after school. I looked at my son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandson, all watching me hopefully. You want me to move to your neighborhood? We want you to be part of Tommy's daily life, Sarah said. Not just weekend visits and special occasions. We want him to grow up knowing his grandmother is a permanent part of his world. But the cost, Mom, Michael interrupted. Do you remember the life insurance policy Dad had through his job? Of course, but that was used up years ago for medical bills. No, Mom. That was his policy through the union. He had another policy through his employer that you never knew about. He kept it secret because he wanted to surprise you. My husband had been gone for 3 years, but he was still finding ways to take care of me. How much? I asked. Enough to buy the house outright and have plenty left over for anything you might need. I looked around the room at my family. The family that had been broken by secrets and trauma, that had been tested by impossible circumstances, that had found a way to survive and protect each other despite everything. Tommy, I said, if I moved to your neighborhood, would you help me plant a garden? Can we plant tomatoes and maybe some flowers for Mr. Buttons? We can plant anything you want. Then yes, I'll help you. Agent Chun appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Walsh, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here who wants to meet you. Behind her was a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a warm smile. Mrs. Walsh, I'm Dr. Elena Martinez. The real Dr. Martinez. Oh my goodness. I thought I know what you thought. The woman who impersonated me was very convincing. Her name was Linda Chun, no relation to Agent Chun, and she'd been studying my methods and my case files for months. How did they know so much about Tommy's situation? Because Mrs. Henderson had been intercepting my communications with Child Protective Services. She knew exactly what our investigation had uncovered, and she used that information to create a convincing alternative narrative. Dr. Martinez sat down across from us. Mrs. Walsh, I wanted to thank you in person. When you refused to believe Linda Chen's story completely, when you kept questioning the details that didn't add up, you probably saved Tommy's life. I almost believed her, but you didn't. You trusted your instincts about your grandson, and that made all the difference. She turned to Tommy. And you, young man, are the bravest person I've ever worked with. What you did took incredible courage. Tommy blushed and buried his face in Mr. Buttons's fur. Dr. Martinez, I said. What happens now for Tommy? I mean, now Tommy gets to be a regular kid who doesn't have to carry any secrets. He'll continue therapy for a while just to make sure he processes everything in a healthy way. But Mrs. Walsh, children are amazingly resilient. Tommy is going to be just fine. That evening, as we sat in the safe house living room watching a movie together, Tommy fell asleep with his head on my lap and Mr. Buttons clutched in his arms. Mom, Michael said quietly, I need you to know something. Throughout this entire ordeal, whenever Tommy was scared or doubted whether he could keep going, he would talk about you. He would say that his grandma Diana was the strongest person he knew, and that if you could handle anything, so could he. I'm not that strong. Yes, you are. You rescued a teddy bear from the garbage because you knew it mattered to a little boy. You figured out that something was hidden inside it. You stood up to people who wanted to hurt your family. And when you thought I was abusing my son, you were willing to turn me in to protect him. Any grandmother would have done the same. No, Mom. Not any grandmother would have been smart enough, brave enough, or determined enough to do what you did. I looked down at Tommy's sleeping face. Peaceful now, in a way it hadn't been for months. Michael, can I ask you something? Anything. When this is all over, when the trials are finished and everyone goes to prison, do you think Tommy will remember being happy? Do you think he'll remember the good parts of being 8 years old? I think Michael said he'll remember that when he needed someone to save him, his grandma Diana climbed out a window and fought the bad guys. And I think that's going to be his favorite story for the rest of his life. 6 months later, I was standing in the backyard of my new house, watching Tommy and his friend Marcus plant tomato seeds in the raised garden bed we'd built together. Marcus, The boy who had impersonated Tommy during the final operation had become a regular fixture in our lives since being placed with a foster family in our neighborhood. "Grandma Diana," Tommy called out. "Marcus wants to know if we can plant carrots too." "Of course we can plant carrots. We can plant anything you boys want." I was deadheading roses when Agent Chen's car pulled into my driveway. She'd become almost like family over the months of trials and legal proceedings, and I could tell from her expression that she had news. "Mrs. Walsh, I wanted to update you on the final sentencing results." "All of them?" "All of them." Mrs. Henderson received life without possibility of parole. Robert Henderson got 25 to life. Betty Kowalski was sentenced to 8 years as part of her plea agreement for testifying against the others. And Detective Morrison, 15 years federal prison. Her cooperation in the early stages of the investigation helped reduce her sentence, but she'll never work in law enforcement again. I sat down on my porch steps, suddenly feeling every one of my 65 years. How many children were there in total? 67 children were identified as victims of the network over the past 7 years. We were able to rescue and reunite 41 of them with their families. And the others? Agent Chen's expression grew somber. Some aged out of the system and were released when they became too old to be profitable. Others, she didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. "Agent Chen, do you think we got all of them? All the adults involved? We believe we've dismantled this particular network completely." "But Mrs. Walsh, networks like this one exist in communities across the country. The work is never really finished. What about the children we saved? How are they doing?" "Better than you might expect." Children who are rescued from situations like this often struggle initially, but with proper support and therapy, most of them go on to live normal, healthy lives. And Tommy Agent Chen smiled. Tommy is thriving. His therapist says he's processing his experiences in a healthy way. Having a strong support system and a sense that he helped save other children has been crucial to his recovery. He still has nightmares sometimes. That's normal and expected. But Mrs. Walsh, watch him playing with Marcus right now. That's a happy, secure child who knows he's loved and protected. I looked over at the boys who were now arguing good-naturedly about whether to plant the carrots in rows or circles. Tommy was laughing, his face dirty with soil, looking exactly like any other 9-year-old having a perfectly ordinary day. "Agent Chen, can I ask you something that's been bothering me?" "Of course." "Why me? Why did Tommy choose to hide the camera in Mr. Button specifically so that I would find it? Why not give it directly to his parents or his teacher?" "Because," she said, "you were the one person in his life who wasn't connected to any part of his daily routine. Mrs. Henderson was monitoring his school, his home, his neighborhood activities, but his relationship with you was separate from all of that. He knew I would be safe to trust. He knew you would move heaven and earth to protect him, and that you were smart enough to figure out what he was trying to tell you." Sarah's car pulled up as Agent Chen was preparing to leave. My daughter-in-law had brought groceries for dinner, something she'd been doing twice a week since I'd moved to the neighborhood. "Agent Chen," Sarah called out as she unloaded bags from her trunk. "Perfect timing. I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done for our family." "Just doing my job." "Mrs. Walsh." "No," Sarah said firmly. "You went above and beyond your job. You kept our family together when everything was falling apart." Agent Chen looked out at Tommy and Marcus, who had abandoned gardening in favor of a water fight with the garden hose. "Mrs. Walsh, these cases, they can wear you down after a while. It's easy to become cynical about human nature when you see the worst of what people can do to children. But families like yours remind me why the work matters. Tommy is going to grow up knowing that when bad things happen to him, good people work together to make them stop." That's a powerful lesson for a child to learn. After Agent Chen left, Sarah and I sat on the porch watching the boys play while we waited for Michael to arrive from work. "Diana," Sarah said, "can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" "Anything." When we first realized what was happening to Tommy, when we first understood that Mrs. Henderson had been abusing him, my first instinct was to run, pack up the car, drive across the country, disappear completely. That's a natural response, but Michael convinced me that running wouldn't solve anything. He said that if we disappeared, Mrs. Henderson would just find other children to hurt. He said we had to be brave enough to fight back even if it was dangerous. Michael was right. I was so angry at him for asking Tommy to be part of the investigation. I thought we were putting our child at risk to help other people's children. Now I understand that we were teaching Tommy the most important lesson a parent can teach. That when you have the power to stop something terrible from happening, you have the responsibility to try. Michael arrived as we were setting the table for dinner. And for the first time in months, we sat down as a complete family without any FBI agents, social workers, or lawyers joining us. "Mom," Michael said as we were finishing dessert, "Sarah and I have something to tell you." My heart skipped. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news," Sarah said, grinning. "We're pregnant." Tommy looked up from his ice cream. "Really? I'm going to have a little brother or sister." "Really? Grandma Diana, that means you're going to be a grandma again." "I'm already a grandma, sweetheart. The best grandma in the world. Now you'll be a grandma twice." That night, after everyone had gone home and Tommy was asleep in his own bed for the first time in 7 months, I sat in my new living room, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been a woman living quietly in the house where I'd raised my son, content with my weekly visits with my grandson and my peaceful retirement routine. Now I was a woman who'd helped bring down a child trafficking network, testified in federal court, and relocated to a new community to be closer to her family. I was also a woman who'd learned that she was stronger, braver, and more resourceful than she'd ever imagined. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Mrs. Walsh, this is Jennifer Martinez, Dr. Martinez's sister." My blood went cold. "Is Elena all right?" "She's fine. But Mrs. Walsh, she wanted me to call you with a message." "What kind of message?" "There's another case, another network, different state. Different setup, but similar methods." "Jennifer, I'm not a federal agent. I'm not a trained investigator." "No, but you're someone who knows how to recognize when children are in danger. You're someone who's proven she'll do whatever it takes to save them." I looked around my peaceful living room, at the family photos on the mantle, at the comfortable life I'd built. "Mrs. Walsh, there's a little girl in Nevada. Her name is Emma Rodriguez." Emma, the child from the photograph Dr. Martinez had shown me, the one they'd told me was dead. "She's alive. She's alive and she's in immediate danger. The local authorities think she's a runaway, but we know better. We, the FBI task force that worked on Tommy's case, Mrs. Walsh, we could really use your help." I thought about Tommy safe in his bed upstairs. I thought about the 41 children who were back with their families because one 8-year-old boy had been brave enough to hide a camera in his teddy bear. "Jennifer," I said, "when do you need me?" 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a rental car in Las Vegas, Nevada, watching a house that looked exactly like every other house in the suburban subdivision. Except this house was where 9-year-old Emma Rodriguez was being held by people who'd convinced the local police she was a chronic runaway. Agent Chun was in the passenger seat, and Agent Martinez, Elena's sister Jennifer, who turned out to be FBI, was in the back with surveillance equipment that would have made Hollywood jealous. "Mrs. Walsh," Agent Chun said, "I want you to understand that this operation is much more dangerous than what we did with Tommy's case. This network is more sophisticated, more violent, and they've had 3 months to plan for the possibility that we track Emma here. But you need me because you're the only person who successfully infiltrated one of these operations without law enforcement training. And because Emma specifically asked for the grandmother who saved Tommy, she knows about Tommy. Word travels fast in the underground railroad that helps traffic children. Emma heard about a boy who hid a camera in his teddy bear and got rescued by his grandmother. She's been carrying a small digital recorder for 6 weeks, hoping someone like you would find her. Where is she hiding the recorder?" Agent Martinez smiled grimly. "In a doll. A baby doll. She's convinced her captors is the only thing that keeps her calm." The parallels to Tommy's situation were unmistakable, but the differences were significant too. Emma wasn't living with family members who were secretly protecting her. She was being held by strangers who'd purchased her from her parents when she was 6 years old. Her parents sold her drug addiction. Agent Chun explained they needed money for their next fix, and Emma's handler offered them $5,000 for a temporary custody arrangement they didn't understand. Temporary custody that became permanent. Exactly. By the time the parents sobered up enough to ask questions, Emma was already being moved through the network. And now the parents are clean. They've been looking for Emma for 3 years, and they're waiting in a safe house in California for us to bring their daughter home. I studied the house through binoculars. How do we get to her? We don't. You do? Agent Martinez handed me a file folder. Mrs. Walsh. According to our intelligence, Emma is being held by a woman named Patricia Valdez. Valdez runs what appears to be a legitimate daycare center, but she's actually housing trafficked children who are rotated between various clients. How many children? We think 6. Currently, Emma is the oldest. What's my cover story? You're a widow looking for a part-time job. You saw their advertisement for a daycare assistant, and you want to apply in person because you don't trust the internet. Will they believe that? Patricia Valdez is always looking for older women to work for her. Grandmotherly types put both the children and the clients at ease. Agent Sean handed me a purse with a hidden camera system. Mrs. Walsh, you'll have audio and video recording capability, plus a GPS tracker and an emergency alert system. But I need you to understand that if something goes wrong, if they discover what you're really doing, we might not be able to reach you in time. What exactly am I supposed to do once I'm inside? Get close to Emma. Let her know who you are and why you're there. Help her understand that rescue is coming, but she needs to keep acting normal until we can coordinate a safe extraction. And the other children, we save all of them or we save none of them. Mrs. Walsh, this isn't like Tommy's situation where we could gradually build a case over months. We have one chance to get this right. I thought about Emma Rodriguez. About 3 years of being told she was just a runaway that nobody wanted to find. I thought about 5 other children who were waiting for someone to save them. Agent Sean, what happens if I can't convince Patricia Valdez to hire me? Then we go to Plan B, which is direct assault on the house with a SWAT team. Much more dangerous for the children. Much lower probability of saving all of them. Then I guess I better be convincing. I walked up to the front door of the house at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, wearing my most grandmotherly outfit and carrying a resume I'd printed at the hotel business center. Patricia Valdez was a woman in her 40s with tired eyes, and the kind of cautious demeanor that comes from years of illegal activity. But when she looked at me, I could see her relaxing slightly. Mrs. Walsh, you called about the assistant position. Yes, dear. I hope you don't mind that I decided to stop by in person. I'm old-fashioned about job interviews. Of course, please come in. The house looked like a legitimate daycare center. Toys scattered around the living room, children's artwork on the walls, the background noise of kids playing in another room. Mrs. Walsh, what's your experience with children? I raised my own son and I've been helping with my grandson for 9 years. I recently moved to Las Vegas to be closer to my daughter, and I'm looking for something to keep me busy. Do you have any concerns about working with difficult children? Some of our kids come from troubled backgrounds. Honey, I've been dealing with difficult children my whole life. The trick is understanding that acting out usually means they're scared or hurting. Something in Patricia's expression shifted. Mrs. Walsh, our children require very specific care. They need consistency, routine, and absolute discretion about their living situation. Discretion. Some of our children are in protective custody. We can't have anyone discussing their cases or their whereabouts with outside parties. I understand completely. Good. Would you like to meet the children? Patricia led me toward the back of the house, and I could hear my heart beating so loudly, I was sure she could hear it too. Children, Patricia called out as we entered what had once been a family room. We have a visitor. 6 children looked up at me with expressions that broke my heart. They were clean, adequately fed, and properly clothed, but they all had the same carefully neutral expressions I'd learned to recognize in Tommy. And there in the corner holding a small baby doll was Emma Rodriguez. She was smaller than I'd expected, with dark hair and large brown eyes that held far too much knowledge for a 9-year-old. When she saw me, something flickered across her face so quickly that anyone else would have missed it. But I didn't miss it. Recognition, hope. Emma, Patricia said, would you like to say hello to Mrs. Walsh? Emma stood up, still clutching her doll, and walked over to me. Hello, Mrs. Walsh. What's your baby's name? It took me a second to realize she was talking about the doll. She doesn't have a name yet, Emma said quietly. I'm waiting for the right person to help me choose one. Well, I said, kneeling down to her level. What kind of name do you think she needs? A brave name. A name for someone who helps people. How about Diana? That's a name for someone who protects children. Emma smiled for the first time. and it was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Diana is perfect. As I spent the next hour talking with the children and helping with their afternoon activities, I was able to observe the setup more carefully. Patricia was clearly in charge, but there were two men who came and went from the house, both carrying weapons, both treating the children with a kind of casual authority that suggested this was a business operation. "Mrs. Walsh," Patricia said as I was preparing to leave, "I'd like to offer you the position. Can you start tomorrow?" "I'd be delighted." "Excellent. We'll start you with afternoon shifts 2 to 6. And Mrs. Walsh, I trust you understand the importance of keeping our children's situations confidential." "Absolutely." As I walked back to my rental car, I could feel Emma watching me through the window. Tomorrow I would go back into that house and find a way to let her know that help was coming. Tonight I would sit in my hotel room and pray that I was strong enough to save her. But first I was going to call Tommy. "Grandma Diana, how's your vacation?" "It's going well, sweetheart. Tommy, I want you to know how proud I am of you." "Why?" "Because the brave thing you did helped me know how to help another little girl who needed saving." "Really? Someone like me?" "Someone exactly like you. Someone who was smart enough to hide evidence and brave enough to trust that the right person would find it." "Are you going to save her, Grandma Diana?" "I'm going to try my best. Then she'll be okay. You always save people." As I hung up the phone, I realized Tommy was right. Somehow in the past year, I'd become someone who saved people. And tomorrow I was going to save Emma Rodriguez and 5 other children, or I was going to die trying. The funny thing was I wasn't scared. I was a 64-year-old grandmother who'd learned she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. And there were children who needed me. That was all the courage I needed. 3 days later, Agent Chun and I sat in the back of an ambulance while paramedics checked Emma Rodriguez for injuries. The raid had gone perfectly. All 6 children rescued, Patricia Valdez and her associates arrested, and a treasure trove of evidence that would help authorities track down other networks. Emma was holding her doll, now officially named Diana, and looking at me with an expression I recognized from Tommy's face 6 months earlier. "Mrs. Walsh," she said quietly, "will you tell Tommy that Emma says thank you?" "Tell him yourself," I said, pulling out my phone. "Tommy, there's someone here who wants to meet you." And as I watched my grandson talk to a little girl he'd never met, but had somehow helped save, I realized that this was what family really meant. Not just blood relatives, but everyone who refuses to let children suffer alone. Everyone who believes that protecting the innocent is worth any risk. Everyone who understands that sometimes the most important thing you can do is rescue a teddy bear from the garbage, because you never know what secrets it might hold. Music. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Music.